We had a live illustration of the loud cries and tears. That was great. It fit right in with our message. I hope she's all right. You go check in on her if you need to. I want to tell you a story about a man named Giovanni. And yes, he was Italian, because how can you not be with a name like Giovanni de Pietro di Bernardone? That's a really long name. I don't think I pronounced it correct. Just so you know, I think I may have. I am not Italian. I don't know how to speak Italian, but that's how I read that. Giovanni de Pietro di Bernardone. That's this guy's name we're talking about. He was born in 1811. And Giovanni was born in Italy, obviously, to a very, very wealthy family. The richest one in the entire town. There is a picture of his city that is right today. His father didn't like his name, maybe because it was so darn long. But his father didn't like his name, so he changed his name from Giovanni di Pietro di Bernardone to Francesco, because he really loved France. And he really loved all of the luxury that came with France. And he was a very, very rich man, the richest one in town. And Francesco grew up with all of the finest things, all of the finest clothes. He had the finest house in town. He had all of the connections through the best parties. He was pretty much born with a silver spoon in his mouth. But he got bored, maybe. When he was around 20, he just got really bored with things. And he's like, you know what I really want? I want glory. I want honor. And his town was at war with a neighboring town. And so he decided, you know what? I'm going to go to war. Because that's how I'm going to get glory and excitement and great stuff in my life. So he went off to war. But growing up in the seat of luxury didn't actually do well for his physique, if you know what I'm saying. And he was captured immediately and taken as a prisoner of war, and ended up living an entire year in a dungeon. So if you can imagine growing up in the seat of luxury, the finest home there is, and now you're in a dungeon, dark, damp, wet. It started to affect him mentally, it started to affect him physically, he started to get sick, and he spent an entire year in the basement of this dungeon, locked away in the cold, wet, damp yuck. And it really took a toll on his body. He started to get sick. But after a year, his dad ransomed him, bought him free, set him free, and brought him home. But he was so dilapidated that he was sick. He was depressed. He spent his times not in his home because he didn't like it there, but just wandering the streets. So he was just kind of, there's another picture of his town. Just wandering the streets of his town, sick and depressed and lonely, just not sure what to do with his life, not sure what was going to happen with himself. He spent a lot of time alone and just wandering around asking what can bring hope to his life. And his old life wasn't doing it for him. His old life of luxury didn't do it for him. His going off to war and trying to find glory in battle didn't do it for him, and now he's just wandering around thinking, what in the world do I do with my life? In his wanderings, he started to wander outside a lot more, not just in town, but around the surrounding fields, and he came across this chapel. It was a stone chapel, and it was totally dilapidated. The thing was just falling apart, the roof had fallen in. Here's a picture of one like that in the same area. And he saw a crucifix inside, and the crucifix, he heard it speak to him. And what it said was, rebuild my church. This crucifix, it sounded like it spoke to him. And so he said, the crucifix told him, rebuild my church. So he took that very literally, and he got excited for the first time, I think, in his entire life. Like, I have a purpose. I have a point. I can do this. And so he went and sold a bunch of his father's stuff. Now, do you think his dad was like, good job? Like, that is totally a great thing for you to do. I'm glad you found something that's really captured your heart and mind. And I believe in you and I'm backing you 100%, right? No, that's not what he said. He sold a bunch of his father's stuff against his will. earned a whole bunch of money, and he started to rebuild this church with the funds made from selling his father's stuff. Well, when his dad found out, his dad took him to court. And he dragged his butt into the courtroom, and he said, "This is my son Francisco, and he stole things from me. And he sold them, and now he's off in the woods with his stone chapel trying to rebuild it. But he took my things, and he sold them." And they said, "Is that what you did, Francisco?" He says, "Absolutely, that's what I did." And so here's a rendition of that court case scenario. And they said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he says, "Well, I renounce my dad. I'm going to renounce my family, my dad, everything." And his dad says, "But I gave you everything." And he says, "Well, you can have it all back." And in the middle of the courtroom, he stripped down naked and gave his dad the clothes on his back. And he's like, "Now you owe me nothing. I have nothing of yours." So there he is, standing stark naked in the courtroom. And he walked out of that courtroom with not a shred of anything. He's stark naked, and he just kind of walks out. Some friends found him. They did end up giving him a cloak, because I know that's on your mind. What's he going to do to walk around the city naked? But they gave him a cloak, and he started to get people together to rebuild this church out in the middle of the woods. And he was going to take this thing literally. And so he started to rebuild it and inviting people in. He says, "But if you want to be a part of what I'm doing, you have to take a vow of poverty. You're not allowed to own anything. You're not allowed to have money. If you want food, you have to go beg for it." So it was a whole big vow of poverty that they all agreed that they were going to do this. And it grew, and it got bigger. And there's a picture of Francisco when he found his cloak and went out into the woods. Well, it grew, and it grew, and it grew. They finally rebuilt this church. And everyone kept coming to this church, and it was a great thing. And today, that church still exists, and it's gotten a lot bigger. It's called the Franciscan Order. I don't know if you know the Catholic Church, but there are still monks today that are part of St. Francis's Franciscan Order. Yes, Francesco, or Giovanni, became known as St. Francis, the patron saint of all of the creatures of the earth, animals. And now look at that. So the Franciscans came from St. Francis, who kind of gave this vow of poverty and walked out of that courtroom with nothing on his back, literally, and rebuilt an entire wing of the Catholic Church to be this huge monastic order. That was back in the 1100s, and now we know him as St. Francis. We sing the St. Francis prayer. We say the St. Francis prayer every now and then. One of my favorite saints of the Church of old is St. Francis. But here's the deal. St. Francis grasped that glory and fame and ended up a broken young man. And then he took a vow of poverty, renounced everything, including the glory, and he built the Franciscan Order of the Catholic Church. Now, to us, that seems kind of backwards. Like, if you want something, you go and you get that thing, right? And Francis decided to do it in the reverse order. He gave up everything, and that's what he found. Now, that's kind of an introduction to where we go with today's passage, because we're talking about how Christ didn't grasp at this title called High Priest, but ended up with it anyways, kind of like St. Francis. And I entitled this first part, Mine. And I thought the best illustration would be these guys. Do you remember these guys? These guys were my favorite guys in the whole Disney world. If you've seen Finding Nemo, you know these seagulls. The seagull noise that they make, they also put the word mine to. So that's all they say over and over again. Mine, mine, mine. And I actually have a funny seagull story where I was on Lake Michigan and kids were young and we've got this big blanket set out. We bring our lunch and I'm eating my sandwich and this seagull just kind of walks up and starts staring at me. And I'm like, wow, this is a brave seagull. He was a lot braver than I thought. He actually took my sandwich out of my hands. Now, I was very surprised. I didn't know what to do, so I karate chopped the seagull. I don't know what I'm doing. I was so surprised he took my sandwich, and I literally did karate chop, not very hard, but he dropped my sandwich. But I had to send a message, you know what I'm saying? Like, he's going to go tell his friends, like, oh yeah, they're just handing out free food. So I did end up karate chopping a seagull on his back one time. Surprised myself that I did that, actually. I was just like, did I just chop a seagull? I think I did. But he didn't bother us anymore, so that I guess that's a good part. But that whole attitude of, that's mine. I deserve that. That is mine. I'm going to go get that kind of a thing. That comes with a lot of baggage to it that we got to kind of weed through, because there's certain things, ambition, a drive that is good and healthy for humanity. But when there comes in some creeping entitlements and other things in there, it starts to sour the healthy drives that we do have. So we're going to look at how Christ operated in this manner in a healthier way. So our passage starts off, every high priest is a man chosen to represent other people. In their dealings with God, he presents their gifts to God and offers sacrifices for their sins. And he is able to deal gently with ignorant and wayward people because he himself is subject to the same weaknesses. Now, we have to remember that the writer of Hebrews is writing to a messianic first century Jewish audience. And so they are fully immersed in, this is before the temple got destroyed in 70 AD, so it's very much in operation. And this is how they worship. There's a temple. You have to go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem once a year for Passover, where a high priest will kill an animal on your behalf and present the blood on the altar and clears your family's name for an entire year. That's how it worked. It was like their Christmas, except violent, basically. Our Christmas is more of like, here's a toy. But this is the major driving force of their entire religion, culture, economy, government, everything wrapped around this one event. The city would grow from about 30,000 people to close to 750,000 people during this pilgrimage. It was a big deal. If you didn't partake of this, then you were like pretty much excommunicated from the faith until you can get right with it. So it's a really big deal. And so they're showing how this high priest temple system is actually, Christ is fulfilling that. Christ actually pronounced judgment on the temple system itself, saying that's going to be destroyed fairly soon. So the Christians didn't wrap their lives around worship at the temple. They wrapped their lives around a table with some elements. So they did it differently. But they still had those major parts of their old religion driving their imagination. So Hebrews is like a commentary on the Old Testament, but in light of Jesus. So if you ever find Hebrews really hard to read, one is probably because you're not a first century Jewish person. And two, it's very, very like intellectually rigid kind of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff in here we're not even going to touch. So if you have lots of questions, you can ask me about them later, and I'll probably say, I'm not really sure. But there are some things in here that are worthy of note. It says that Christ is able to deal gently with ignorant, wayward people because he himself is subject to the same weaknesses. Ignorant and wayward. We kind of take this term ignorant. If someone called you ignorant, how are you going to feel? Probably not very good, right? Because it's an insult to be called ignorant, right? But what does the word ignorant mean? You just don't know something, right? Is there stuff you don't know? There's plenty of stuff I don't know. So I'm ignorant. So we can take this as an insult in certain contexts, where people use it derogatively and then say, oh, you're so ignorant. Or we can use it as a descriptor for areas where we just don't know about stuff. So when we hear the term ignorant, it's kind of like, oh, ouch, that one kind of hurts. But the term ignorant just means that you have like a lack of awareness about something. And there's plenty of things that I'm ignorant about. When I started work on my house, because we have a farmhouse that was built in 1897, and I've renovated it twice. And the first time was to try and figure out how to do it, and then the second time was to fix everything that I did wrong. Because I was very ignorant about how to do all this work, and now I know a whole lot more than I used to. But there's still lots of things I'm ignorant about, like math. I'm not very good at math. I don't really enjoy math. I took math in college. I saved it for my senior year, last semester. I'm taking Math 101 with all these like little kids. And I'm like, I'm about to graduate, but I hated math, so I waited till the very last opportunity to do this course. I worked so hard in that course, and I got a C. And I was so proud of that C, because I'm not, once you involve the alphabet with the math, I'm just like, these two don't belong together, because I don't know how to add A and B together. because they're not numbers. It's like A plus B equals M. I don't know. Like, I can't figure this stuff out. So I worked really, really hard at math, and I got a C. So there's lots of stuff I'm ignorant about in math still, and plenty of other topics and subjects as well. And I'm guessing there's lots of things that you're ignorant about as well. Because ignorant is not an insult in its just definition of a word. It just means that you have a lack of awareness of something. And I'm sure that we have lots of things. And sometimes have you ever got mad at yourself for how you used to be ignorant about something? And now you feel like totally dumb? Like, how could I have not known about that thing? And you kind of made some bad mistakes in your past, or you did some things that you're not very proud of. But then someone came up to you and said the words, well, you did the best you could with what you knew. Right? Have you ever heard those words? But you look back on your former self and you're like, you're such an idiot. Like you're so mean to yourself all the time, right? Well, if you ever listen to the talk inside of your head, there's a lot of self-critical talk inside of our head. Like we're getting down on ourselves for what we used to be or how we used to be ignorant of things. But really, Jesus is not a jerk like that, like we are to ourselves. It says he deals gently with people who have lack of self-awareness in things. Because everyone has a lack of self-awareness in something. And Jesus is like this person standing in the highest halls of heaven on your behalf, and he's said the words, they've done the best they could with what they knew. Isn't that great? Isn't it great? Like to know that there is somebody standing in the highest courts of wherever, however, whatever that metaphysic we call heaven is, and they're just saying, that voice in your head is not the one that's up there talking on your behalf. It's Jesus' voice that says he deals gently with the people who are ignorant, the people who don't know things, people who are not self-aware enough to make the best actions for their life or their world. And Jesus is up there saying, you know what? You did the best you had with what you knew at the time. So, and then there's misguided. Have you ever been misguided? I was misguided by my GPS not too long ago. I popped in, to find my iPhone, I had to go pick up my son Nolan from a friend's house. And I couldn't remember how to get to the friend's house because I don't go there very often. Because someone's been picking him up and taking him there. But I had to go get him and his friend and then bring them home. And so I'm like, oh yeah, find my iPhone. I'm like, find Nolan's phone, take me to his phone. And I just popped it in and hit go and I just start driving. I'm like, this is familiar. Yeah, I know this. And then it said, turn here. I thought, I don't remember turning here before, but I'm going to trust my GPS because it told me to turn there. So I turned there. And then I'm driving down this dirt road. I go 10 miles down this dirt road and it says, turn here. And then I turn here and I'm going down and there's just farm fields everywhere. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't remember this. Maybe it's taking me on a shortcut. Maybe it's just helping me out and taking me in a good direction. And then it says, you've arrived. And I'm like, I'm in the middle of a field. How have I arrived? I don't know. What's going on? And then I pull up the thing, find my iPhone. And I'm like, he's not here. It moved. And so it moved. And I said, well, take me to his phone where it is now. It did the same thing. It took me to another field. And I'm in the middle and it says, you have arrived. I said, no, I haven't. I'm in the middle of corn. I don't really know. Unless he's in the middle of the corn, but then I pulled up my phone again and I said, he's not here. It just kept moving. And I know he's not able to move 5 miles at a time. So I'm like, okay, I got to figure out, where the heck am I? How do I get back to a main road? And then I got back out to the main road and then I used my memory because that's helpful. And I was like, okay, I remember I had to turn at that party store. And I went to the party store and I turned there and I said, oh, now it's coming back to me. And I finally got there. I was a half hour late. I was misguided by my GPS. I trusted technology and it let me down. I was kind of upset about that because I was in a rush that day too. And I thought, I'm just going to use technology and get me there. Nope, ended up in the middle of corn twice. And then I had to figure out where I was and how to get back. Have you ever been misguided? Right? Misguided, it just basically means to be deceived by someone or something, maybe GPS, to be led astray from the path of truth. Have you ever been misguided? I've been misguided, right? Everyone's been misguided before, where we're trusting in someone or something that's going to deliver on something that we were really hoping was going to happen, and then it didn't. And we're like, oh my gosh. And then somebody got hurt in the process, or something got messed up in the process, or I was late to get my son in the process. And all that negative self-talk kicks in. It's like, why did you do that? Why are you so dumb? Why did you trust in a piece of technology that's going to take you in the middle of corn? And all that negative talk is not the talk that is up in heaven right now. Because Jesus says, you know what? We understand. Jesus understands that you were ignorant about something. And yeah, you did the best with what you could, with what you had at the time or what you knew. And also, like, we put our trust in something that didn't work out. And Jesus says, I get that. I understand that. All that negative self-talk in your head is not the way of Jesus. It's not Jesus' voice in your head. If someone ever tells you that the critical voice in your head is the voice of God, that's called spiritual abuse. And there's no reason to attribute the critical voice in your head with God. Because in our Bible, God is not called the accuser, right? But the voices in our head are always accusing. They're always like, oh, you moron, you idiot, why'd you do this? Very critical. But the accuser is not the name of God, right? In the book of Hebrews, it's the advocate, or the one that stands, the mediator, the one that's standing on our behalf in the highest courts of heaven. And that person that stands there in the highest courts of heaven, Christ deals gently with our lack of awareness and our wanderings. He understands. He's been human. God knows what it's like to be a human being because he became one in Christ on our behalf. And so Christ deals gently. He's not the voice in your head. That is not the one that's up in heaven. Christ deals gently with our lack of awareness and our wanderings. So be encouraged by that. And then it says here, no one can become a high priest simply because they want the honor. They must be called by God to this work, just as Aaron was. That's an Old Testament person, Aaron. And that is why Christ did not honor himself by assuming he could become high priest. No, he was chosen by God. So Christ doesn't show up and then say, you know what? I deserve this. Maybe he did, but he didn't show up and say, I am entitled to all of the glory and all of the credits and all of the things. This is all mine. This is all mine. I'm going to take it and I'll use it for everyone's good. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to use it for everyone's good, but it's mine. Christ didn't show up and do that. He showed up and gave up all of his rights to be God-like amongst us. He was not like half human and half God, and he could pull out his little God card and do like superhuman magic tricks. Like, watch this, I'm going to walk in water, guys. Like, check this out. And he just like takes off. He was fully human, lived a fully human life, just like us. Didn't cheat. Didn't pull out some kind of like X-Men superpower. It's like, well, I'm God, I can do this too. Like, gave up everything to live a fully human life. And I believe that even includes the knowledge that he was God. I don't think Jesus walked around and he was like, yeah, I'm God. It was great to be up in heaven, and earth is kind of hard, but hey, I'll be all right. He gave up everything to incarnate in human flesh. And he had to figure out life. He had to figure out how to be here. He had to figure out how to be faithful. He had to figure out who he was and what he was called to do. And then figure out how to do it in the best possible way. So Christ didn't cheat and just pull out the God card and cheat and then like hand us. No, he says he didn't grasp at any of that at all. Didn't grasp at any of the rights that can come with that. Set it all aside. And just looks like Francis gave up everything. And Christ gave up even more than Francis did. And lived a fully human life. So Christ knows what it's like to have a critical voice in the head telling you, oh my gosh, why do you do this? Why are you such a... Christ knows what it's like to not know something. This is weird because we give all the omnis to God. Like, I'm the powerful and I'm the present and I'm the knowing and all that kind of stuff. And when we assume that Christ had all that too when he was in human form, but he gave up everything that it was to be God to live a human life. So he didn't have all that. He didn't like get born and then know how to talk, right? He didn't know how to walk. He had to be apprenticed into like masonry carpenter work by his dad, Joseph. Like, he had to learn all of this stuff. And he had to keep learning and keep growing and keep... the book of Luke actually tells us that he grew in stature and knowledge and favor with God and people. So he had to learn things and grow, and so he knows what this is like to be human. And now, because he's lived a fully human life, he didn't grasp at like, oh, I get all these titles, I get all these powers, I get all this stuff, and now I'll just wield it for humanity's benefit. He gave up everything, lived a fully human life, just like the one that you live, did everything through the connection to the Father and the power of the Holy Spirit. Nothing did he pull out of a God card and say, I'm going to cheat and just turn this water into wine just to show everybody this cool trick kind of thing. It was all done through the leading of the Father and the power of the Spirit, just like our lives. Except Christ did it perfectly for our benefit, because we couldn't do it perfectly. And so Christ does not take at all. Christ only receives. And the way to develop human virtue and character is through renunciation. This is the thing. You can have drives. You can have ambition. You can say, I got dreams and I want to accomplish this stuff. That's all good, healthy human things. But if we have like these, if we have these things that I have, like I am entitled to all of this stuff because of who I am or what I've done, once you get the attitude of entitlement, you let go of humility. And humility is the ground character of everything that will be built on top of that. If you don't have humility, you can't learn other character traits. You can't learn how to develop love and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and self-control. All those things, they're built on the foundation of humility. And humility is not self-depreciating. Humility is knowing who you are and what you're capable of and admitting those things, which includes admitting a whole bunch of things that you're not capable of. But it also acknowledges the areas that you do have gifts and talents in, but you hold those in knowledge. So this is how God does it. If we want to become the kind of person that Christ was, we have to do it in the way that Christ did it. Does that make sense? Like, you can't just bypass, like, I'm going to go and get humility and then get it, and then I'm like, look what I did. It's like, oh wait, and now I'm not humble anymore because I set out to get it and then I got it. You have to build everything in your life upon the groundwork of humility, because that is the foundation for which all other virtues are built. All other character traits and virtues are built upon the foundation of humility, which means acknowledging your gifts and the drives that God has given you to accomplish your visions and goals and dreams. That's a part of it. But it never comes with a spirit of entitlement that says, I am the most exceptional person. I deserve that, I deserve that, I deserve that. Christ didn't do any of that, even though he did deserve all of the titles. He gave them up and built on the ground. He renunciated everything, and that humility became the rock-solid foundation that he built his entire life on. My homeboy, Thomas Merton, he said this: the mind cannot grow in humility, love, or detachment. It remains attached to things. Only by letting go of all that ties us to the world, wealth, power, ambition, can we truly become free. And in that freedom, we develop the virtues that unite us to God. Now, a very big thing is, like, in the modern religious world, is if you have all the right ideas, then you're good. Right? Here's the creeds that we believe. So if you agree with these creeds in your brain, then you're good. And that's not what Jesus teaches us. He says it's about the virtues. It's about the character that is developing in your life. Are you having these fruits of the Spirit come out of your life of love and joy and peace and patience? All those things are going to be built on the rock-solid foundation of humility. But the problem that modern religion, since the 1600s, is that we get the ideas about God, and then if you have the correct ideas about God, then you're like, oh, I'm right. I got it all figured out. I'm good to go. And now I got to tell everyone else about all the great ideas and the correct ideas because all their ideas are wrong. And then there's no humility on that. So when religion is just built on doctrinal ideas, it produces pride and arrogance. But when it's built on humility, and then you can have virtues come out of that. And then those virtues lead us to do things like St. Francis did. And like dreams and visions and goals and movement come out of the rock-solid ideas, rock-solid virtues that are built on top of the grounds of humility. While Jesus was here on earth, he offered prayers and pleadings with a loud cry and tears to the one who could rescue him from death. And God heard his prayers because of his deep reverence for God. Okay, I don't really imagine Jesus crying out to God saying, I need some help down here. It was really hard, but this is what it says. Jesus was somebody who not just had all the power in his back pocket. He says, well, you know, if they kill me because I'm saying all these things and doing all these actions that they don't like, if they kill me, I'll just, raise myself up and be all right. He needed faith that if he did this correctly, that if he built his life on humility and then did these actions of perfect love, that was going to be powerful enough to defeat death. Not just the power he had in his back pocket because he's authoritative and he's God and all stuff. It says here that he offered prayers and pleadings to God. Now, have you ever heard the term, did you offer them an olive branch? Have you ever heard that term, to offer someone an olive branch? It means like you got like a problem with somebody, you're going to offer an olive branch of peace. I'm like, okay, we'll make up here. That was actually a Greek, it was thing, to offer the olive branch. Prayers and pleas was actually a practice of Greek Roman culture where if you were in court and you lost your court case and you're like, oh boy, the judge is going to come down on my head. If you took a physical olive branch out and gave it to the judge, what you're doing is you're asking for mercy. Would you please go easy on me? I know I lost, but I'm offering you up an olive branch. Would you show me mercy in your dealings with me? I know that I lost and I got something coming, but would you just put me in jail instead of, execute me? Like olive branch. You're asking for mercy from a higher authority. So they would do this in the Greek culture with gods as well. They would offer olive branches to their gods that were up there. So it's actually like a Greek practice to offer an olive branch. And it says it's the same Greek word that Jesus used, that the writer of Hebrews uses here for Jesus. This is what he was doing with God. He was having a really hard life. And he's offering an olive branch up to God saying, could you have mercy on me? Because this is really hard. Has anyone ever felt that? Yeah, life is really hard. Could you go easy on me a little bit? This is what Jesus is doing with God, offering up these olive branches of pleas and seeking protection. It was also if you were defeated by a military, and then the general came down and you were the general that got defeated, normally they would pretty much make a show of you in a very bad way, and it wouldn't be good. But if you offered an olive branch to the general, they would say, well, I guess I can't, poke and prod him in front of all the people before I kill him. The olive branch was, well, at least we'll take him prisoner and he can just go prisoner and we won't torture him to death, kind of a thing. It was like you defeated me, and so I'm offering an olive branch and I'm pleading for your mercy and your help. This is the same word that is used in the book of Hebrews here when it says that he offers prayers and pleadings. It's the only time it's used in the entire New Testament. That Jesus is offering an olive branch up to God, asking with loud cries and tears for the mercy of God, please rescue me from death. You remember the Garden of Gethsemane? When Jesus is sweating blood, he's like, I know you can deliver me. But he's there, sweating blood, drops of blood. He's anxious and he's like, I don't want to do this, but not my will be done, but your will be done, kind of a thing. That was that moment. I'm offering an olive branch up to God. And Jesus didn't defend himself. He fully relied on God's vindication of his perfect life to pass him through death on our behalf. And that's what happened. Jesus defeats death by sticking with humility and love to God, doing it perfectly in a way that you and I couldn't do, and then clears the bouncer at the gates of death, and now we just kind of pass on through. And there's nothing that can touch us anymore because Christ has done this on our behalf. And the writer of Hebrews is saying, this wasn't easy for him. This was his life's battle. He had to live this perfect life of humility and love so that when he died, it actually poisoned, the early Greek fathers would say that Christ was so pure that it was poisonous to death when he entered the gates of death. And so death had to spit him out. That's how the Greek fathers and mothers of the church describe that moment where he enters, where he dies. He's crucified, dead, and buried. Like, he defeated death by death, as another Greek father said. So that's what he does on our behalf, because there's no way that I'm going to defeat death all by myself. But Christ does it on our behalf, and now is that voice in the highest of all heaven saying, they did the best they could with what they knew. It's like, wow. That like can relieve so much existential anxiety, right? Like, because I have all of this like imposter syndrome quite a bit, even though I'm a pastor, I've been doing this forever. It's like, but am I really like doing it right? Do I got this all figured out? Like, I can still think these thoughts in my head of like, oh man, this is really hard, and life is hard, and like, I don't understand all this. But I get those self-critical thoughts too. And I know that's a part of being human. Christ had those thoughts in his brain because he was tested in every way like us. But there's a different voice in the highest courts of all of heaven on our behalf. They did the best they did. They did the best they could with what they knew. And yeah, they were misguided at times. They got caught up in this illusion or that lie or this pursuit. It happens. Totally happens. And if we learn from it and foster more humility and love, then we grow from it. And hopefully we live a life that does less damage than we did yesterday. If you're living more loving today, then you're doing less damage than you did yesterday. Because any action done outside of love can bring damage to the world. And none of us are perfect. So you've wounded people, I've wounded people, because I didn't act in a loving way, even though I can convince myself that I was. And people have wounded you. And people have wounded me. But if we learn how to love better and learn how to have this foundation of humility, then we do less damage with our lives. This is what this virtue is all about. Not just about becoming pious, holy people that walk around barely touching the ground. It's about leaving a better mark on this world. So even though Jesus was God's son, he learned obedience from the things that he suffered. So the highest position in the cosmos is one who was instructed in compliance and submission. Those are the words in compliance and submission. And historically, religion has demanded docility from its adherents without embodying it in its highest positions. This is one of the things that really super highly organized religion gets wrong. And you hear like lots of pastors like, oh, that person, they had the largest church in America, and now it's come out that they've been embezzling funds, or they're sexually this, and all this stuff comes out really fast, right? Like, wow, where'd that come from? How'd this happen? But then they demand those things that they're asking, they demand those things from the people that are not able to do it themselves. And Christ is not this way, right? He learned submission and compliance and obedience, which is not the same as docility. He was actively searching for the will of God in his life. To be compliant is not to just kind of like be a floppy rag doll in the hands of God, like whatever, just do whatever you want kind of a thing. You have to actively be on the lookout for where God is leading you at each day. Like, what am I up to today? And it's not going to be a big, grand, glorious thing every single day. Like, our life is not a sitcom show. It's very normal, it's very regular, it's non-dramatic, but God leads us every day in non-dramatic things that build humility and love into us. And learning submission and compliance to God is not the same as just being docile and just like floppy ragdoll. But we are actively engaged in searching for where God was leading us, and then we say, that's where we're going, that's where we're going, that's where we're going. It's a very active submission that Christ had to learn. And a core characteristic of God is humility. And those best equipped to lead us are those who have learned humility and gentleness. If they don't have humility and gentleness, probably not going to be the best leaders to follow. Humility and gentleness. And I don't know of a lot of leaders that are embodying those things for us today. But that's what Christianity is about. Humility and love in gentleness and being actively open for where God is leading us in this moment. I like what Catherine of Siena said. She says, the path to heaven lies through humility. And the deeper the humility, the nearer to God. So pursue this humility that Christ had. So a couple of questions for us. If God is like Jesus, and Jesus is humble, do I seek to be like God in this way? When you're like, I want to be like God, does that look like Jesus? Or does that look like some kind of glory quest? Okay. If God is like Jesus and Jesus is humble, do I expect humility from those in power above me? I would hope so. Do I practice gentleness towards those I see as ignorant and misguided? Ouch. That one hurts. That one really hurts. Especially when I'm driving. You ignorant, misguided, you get in your own lane. Okay, do I practice gentleness towards those I see as ignorant and misguided? So that's what God does with me. That's what it's like to be like God. The last one, am I learning? Am I learning? Or do I feel like I've already arrived and I'm good to go? If you feel like you've already arrived and you're good to go, there's no humility in that, because there's lots and lots of things that I don't know, that you don't know. There's plenty to learn still. So if you're learning, you're growing in humility if you're learning. Now our benediction is out of Psalm 1. It says, He shares our grief and wipes away our tears, and even in this life He shelters us beneath the shadow of His wings. Our fears and hopes are known to Him. His faithfulness will be our shield and buckler. We can trust His constancy and know He will be with us through the best and through the worst. I may be threatened by the passing harm of outward pestilence, but I still trust He gives His angels charge, and with His arm He shelters and embraces me. No power can separate me from His love. His name is my protection and delight. I pour my heart and soul to Him in songs and psalms, and He will bring me through my darkest hour. Psalm 91, retold by Malcolm Guy.